Welcome to Stay Alive with Church Alive, and this is your host and president of Church Alive Development Corporation, yes, and the proud pastor, you're right, of Church Alive Community Church. And once again, we're here to bring you a holistic approach to the gospel, because God is not only concerned about our spiritual needs, but he's also concerned about our physical needs as well. And over the 30 years that we have brought quality information and resources and services, and we've dealt with many issues. And we thank you for allowing us to help educate you on those things that will allow you to live more prosperous and more successful, and with the sense of pleasure in these very difficult days that we're living in. We're going to deal with a very special program today, because we're talking about children, and children that have really no defender, children who are left in the hands of their parents to raise them up, of course, in the fear and knowledge of God, but to raise them properly. We have a silent crisis in our hands, with many thousands of children being taken from their homes and from their families to family disputes that cause these things to happen. But the worst of all, we have a broken family court system in New York, and it is an overrun system because the caseloads are enormous, but the attorneys are very few. And so as a result of this, children are left in limbo, and many of them going into foster care because they're waiting for the court to take on their cases. And this has been a solid problem, because many parents do not have an advocate. They have no one to speak out and say what's going on. But Church Alive and the partnership of churches here in the Bronx, we are going to speak out. We are going to crusade for these children so that the court system will do the better job as they are sworn to by this government. And so we are very, very fortunate to have a family court attorney in our partnership of churches. And his name is Mr. David Shapiro, attorney David Shapiro. And he's with us today, and with a wealth of experience in the family court situation. But I want to cite that the Bronx, out of all the family courts throughout New York, is the most overrun and the most neglectedly overrun. But something can be done about it, because our children deserve more. And so without any further ado, I would like to introduce our attorney, Mr. David Shapiro. Welcome to Church Alive.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Reverend, for the opportunity. Long story short, I was born in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, on Bushwick Avenue, for those of you who knew. And I grew up across the street from the first big low-income housing project built in the 1930s. So I grew up on Bushwick Avenue. And then as far as my educational background, I graduated from Eastern District High School, which no longer exists. And then I went to what at that time was called Hunter College in the Bronx, which is now Lehman College. So I have a long connection with the Bronx. And my wife worked there. She was in social work there for 27 years. After that, as far as my educational background, I got an MSW. And then later on, I got my law degree from Pace University Law School, and I've also lectured in the paralegal programs at Lehman College and Westchester Community College. After I graduated from college, I entered the Peace Corps. I guess I'm still a 60s kind of guy, wanting to make the world better. And I went to the Peace Corps, served in the West Indies, had a great time. I taught Spanish there, did some youth work, organized basketball for kids living in the capital city. And I did that from 66 to 67. After the Peace Corps, I came home and I taught. I taught first in the Bronx, near East Crotona, near Crotona Park. and then for 4 years in Brooklyn. And while I was teaching, I started going for my master's in social work degree. Why? Because I've always liked working with people, and I'm good at it, to be quite honest. And I did a lot of different things in social work. I did tenant organizing on the Lower East Side. I worked in Creedmoor Mental Hospital, for those of you who know it. I ran the James Weldon Johnson Community Center on First Avenue and 114th Street in East Harlem. I did that for a couple of years. I worked nights in East Harlem. And then I worked for what had been called the Office of Mental Retardation and Developmental Disabilities. And for those of you who remember Willowbrook, I worked in a place just like Willowbrook upstate in Rockland County called Letchworth Village. And it was a tough place to work, but the reason why I wanted to work there is because I felt that it was something important socially, because the state was closing those places down. And I helped placing people in the community, and luckily, mercifully, it was closed, like Willowbrook. So then, while I was there, I decided that I wanted to go to law school. That was something I'd always wanted to do from the time I was young. For a variety of reasons, I didn't do it, so I did social work. And I had to go at night. I lived in Brooklyn, and Pace was up in White Plains. I was teaching. I went at night. I was in social work, I'm sorry. I went at night for 4 years. I had the help of my family and my wife, raising my two girls. And I graduated from Pace University in 1987. I was admitted to the bar in 1989. And after I was admitted to the bar, my first job was at District Council 37, Municipal Employees Legal Services Plan. DC 37, for those of you who know, is one of the biggest and most powerful unions in the city, representing city workers. I worked there a long time. And while I was there, I first was on the matrimonial team. We were doing divorce cases. And then for about 10 years, I worked on the family court team. And that's where I first became acquainted with family law.
Okay.
Family court.
Now,
Reverend, did you want to ask?
No, well, you heard I opened the program by talking about the crisis in the family court. And what you have established that is that you have the experience to deal with the cases and the issues and the sensitivity, and your social work has all qualified you to really have the compassion and the understanding for families in distress. But we have children that are going through the family court. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about the family court system, why it's broken and a crisis. What are the needs that are now needed in the family court?
Yeah. Well, where shall I start? In my humble opinion, it's really a disaster, and it's a broken system. And for everybody who knows it and works there, if they're honest, they'll say the same thing. What do I mean? First of all, I tell this to all my clients when I start representing them in Bronx Family Court, that it's important for them to understand some of the difficulties, because it all affects their cases and their lives. Family court in the Bronx is one of the 2 or 3 busiest courts in America. It's tremendous. And that was even before COVID. But since COVID, it's gotten exponentially worse. What do I mean? Well, family court is often referred to as poor people's court. And I think the reason is that because the way it's set up, in many ways, it can meet the needs of poor people. Specifically, it allows for pro se filings. Pro se, Latin meaning people can represent themselves. They can file on their own without a filing fee. That's very important. That's the only court, I believe, where people can do that. For matrimonials, people have to pay over $200 if they want to start a divorce. Family court, you don't have to do that. You can file on your own. That's the good news. The bad news is that in the past, pretty much before COVID, when people would file, and let me just say, family court has jurisdiction, has about 8 or 9 different areas of jurisdiction, including custody, visitation, child support, domestic violence, ACS cases, juvenile delinquency cases, and I may have left out 1 or 2 things, but that's essentially the areas of jurisdiction in family court. And prior to COVID, when people would file, they could just walk in and file. It could take a while, but they can file. They would get a file number, and a file would be open in their name, and then a docket number for each individual case that they file. So you would get a file number, and if you wanted to file a custody petition, you'd get a docket number for that case. And if there's a domestic violence situation, you'd get a separate docket number for that case. But they'd all be in the same file. Now, because it's so overwhelmed and understaffed and probably underfinanced, people have to wait months to get a file number and before they can even see a judge, except in a domestic violence situation. Those cases will be seen pretty quickly. I will say that. But for the most part, most of the cases, people have to wait months before they get to court. Then it may take a long time for them to even get an attorney if they qualify. And there are many reasons for that. I don't even know where to start. We've always been understaffed. And to talk about the relationship between that and really addressing the needs of people, I just remember one time years ago, I had a case, and myself and I had a fairly quiet day, and I really felt that I was able to use all of my background, all of my talents, and focus on that case. If I have 15 cases in a day, it's difficult. In addition to which, all the cases, courts have to be off the record, finished by 4:30 every day. So that means there's tremendous pressure on everybody. I don't know where to go, but the Bronx also, in my opinion, is treated by contempt by the political system. What does that mean? Well, the best example I can give is that in other boroughs, there's a paid position called an intake coordinator, because there's a lot of cases that come in on intake. The city wasn't funding that. They relied on a volunteer attorney to do that. Somebody who had a whole caseload and was just a volunteer, and the city didn't have to pay. Used to be in family court, you could be there till 8, sometimes 9 o'clock at night. Well, a number of years ago, I believe in order to stop paying overtime, the city changed it so that we have to be off the record by 4:30, so the city doesn't have to pay overtime to the clerks and to the court officers. Having said that, because I've been doing it a long time, I love the court. And what does that mean? I love the people who work there, and we get along very well. And there's a culture and there's a vibe there. Every organization, every bureaucracy has a feeling to it. And the feeling here in the Bronx is pretty good. That the people who work there, for the most part, are very committed and they'll do their best. But it's difficult. Other boroughs are not like that. In Brooklyn, to make a long story short, I don't want to waste your time, but I once had a case there where my adversary was very confrontational and abusive and very aggressive. And I said to the judge, well, why does it have to be like that? You really think it's necessary to be that aggressive? Because we're dealing with serious problems. And the judge says, well, in Brooklyn, we feel that leads to a better level of practice, which is shocking, which is ridiculous. In the Bronx, for the most part, we try to work things out and we communicate with each other. But the court needs help. I don't know if that answers your question, Judge.
Oh, no, it not only answered the question, but gave us a wealth of information to our viewing audience. We want to apologize to our viewing audience for the visual of our attorney, only because of the fact that the information that we're bringing to you is so vital that we felt that we go on beyond the visual distraction. Now, I want to ask you a question, though. Um, who can call in a complaint to to ACS?
Oh, who can call in to complain? Really, anyone can. First of all, if someone has knowledge that they believe a child is being abused or neglected, they can call into ACS. I don't have the number right here, but I have it somewhere.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And when you call into ACS, they will listen to the complaint and decide whether it's appropriate for them to get involved. If they accept the complaint, then they are obligated to finish the investigation within 60 days. After the 60-day period, they evaluate the evidence that they have. They will then decide it's either unfounded, meaning there's not a basis for a legal case of abuse or neglect, or it's indicated, meaning that they do have a legal basis to proceed.
Mm-hmm.
If they find it indicated, they can file in family court. They don't have to. So they can file a petition against usually the parent or even someone else who's very involved, who's involved with abusing the child. They can file a petition for abuse and neglect.
Mm-hmm.
One thing, and I told this to Reverend Briquette, it may sound, I don't know how it's going to sound, but I tell all my clients who have ACS cases is that it's important to have a professional, respectful relationship with the caseworker. Why? Because they have a lot of power. In cases that start off bad with caseworkers, just go downhill. Can lead to the removal of a child, can lead to the termination of parental rights, which is like the death sentence in family court. Mm-hmm. And they can file after a child has been in care for, I think, 22 months. They don't have to, but they can, and very often they will. And that begins the process of ending the legal rights of the parent, and it's over. I'm not sure where else to go. As far as, the other thing that's very important is that there are certain people who are mandated reporters. Mandated, meaning that if they believe there's a reason to suspect that there's abuse or neglect, they are legally obligated to call it into ACS.
Mm-hmm.
Teachers are mandated reporters. Medical personnel. Just doctors and stuff like that.
Okay, could you want to share with us what is an Article 10?
Article 10 is Article 10 of the Family Court Act, which sets out the procedures and the requirements for abuse and neglect case, and the requirements that would have to be proven for ACS to get a finding of abuse or neglect.
Right. Now, if you were
Article 10 cases.
Okay. If you were responding to a child abuse situation and you got a phone call from a family, what is the first thing that you want to instruct them?
All right, I'm going to tell them that if ACS has gotten involved, there will be a caseworker coming to your house. And it's important to try to develop a good relationship with the caseworker. Mm-hmm. Not everybody wants to do that, and some caseworkers are people. Some are great, some are terrible. And I once had a client, I find this hard to believe. Years ago, a client told me that the caseworker was high coming to her house. Mm-hmm. What I said to her, I said, I don't care. I think you have to have a good relationship with them, because in my experience, cases that start out bad go downhill. I'm not there to destroy ACS. I'm there to help my clients. And sometimes the caseworkers can be tremendously helpful, but not always. But it doesn't matter. They have the power at that point, and it can lead to removal of the child and it can lead to the termination of your parental rights and a lot of other bad things.
Well, I would say right at this point, this is where they need Attorney David Shapiro, and this is the reason why I'm bringing you to my family Church Alive viewers, so that they can take your number, they can contact you when these things, and they can happen. It can happen. I've had, as a pastor, calls from family members just said, we just we were having an argument. The child was crying and crying, and all of a sudden someone knocked on the door, and the child had crying not because anyone was abusing the child, but the child was crying because the parents were arguing.
Right.
And so, but what they did, they called me. Of course, right. I'm a pastor. I can only resolve those many cases, the spiritual areas. But at that point, it moved on further. So what I'm saying to my audience now is that we are blessed to have Attorney David Shapiro. And David Shapiro, I would like to give you about 3 minutes to speak out of the heart for the many, many families that you've helped and those who could fall into the same situation even today. I would like you to say something to them about your compassion, your understanding there in that midnight hour, okay?
Sure. Well, despite all the bad news, I love family court. I've been here for 20 years. I know it's strange, but what I mean is that family court has become like my family in a way. And like all families, there are problems. There's good and there's bad. I've spent a lot of time talking about the bad. The good is that amongst those who work there and have worked there for a long time, there's a great vibe, a real good feeling of sense of community and a concern for the clients, despite the problems. The problem is the numbers and the lack of support, because it's always been overwhelming and it's getting worse. And for the reasons that I've said, I have about 50 years of experience helping people between my social work experience and my legal experience. But I can only apply that experience to help my clients if the situation is such that I have the time to do it. If I'm overwhelmed, I can't always do it. It's their loss. And recently, for reasons which I don't understand, this is something I didn't mention, is that for years, family court lawyers were only paid $75 an hour for appointed cases, for people that qualify, for poor people. It's very low rate, and it was that way for 20 years. Recently, the rate was raised. But there are still very few attorneys who want to come to this court because they know how difficult it is. And in fact, 4 lawyers have left. And that would probably amount to 500 or 600 cases affecting over 1,000 people. So it's very difficult. In Bronx Family Court, for the most part, like I said, people talk to each other and try to work things out. Some of the judges are great. They're not all great. They're people like everybody else. Some of them are really good. Some of them are great, caring people. But the structure, the bureaucratic and political issues have to be addressed and not ignored. And I'm here to do what I can. And I'd be willing to speak to people. I would offer a free first consultation and see where it goes from there. And Reverend Burkett has my information. My email is probably the best way to get to me. Is davidm925@AOL. It's AOL, just like all the old people. davidm925@AOL. You can call me at 718-681-2628. And I will get back to you as soon as I can.
Okay, David, are you available to come out to do workshops and presentations?
Sure. Absolutely.
Right, you've done something like that before?
Yeah, I have.
Okay, very good. Well, we're going to look to the pastors who are watching the show and to know that I would entreat you to contact Mr. David Shapiro. Let him come and talk to your congregation. I feel that it would be a wealth of information, and sometimes information coming right on time before something happens. And the way it is now with the families, the stress on families, it could happen to any family. And we are so privileged to have Mr. David Shapiro part of our cadre of services at the Church Alive Clergy Partnership. And we want to thank you, David Shapiro, for the quality of work, the
And
sensitivity.
Reverend, well, my specialty is family law. As I said, I've been working here for over 20 years. So if people have other sorts of legal problems that they would like to speak to somebody about, they can contact me and I can try to get them help. I know a
Very
lot of people.
okay. This is good that we have added services beyond Mr. David Shapiro, who has contacts with immigration attorneys and divorce attorneys and things like that. That you out there and watching this program might have another need. You may say, "Oh, well, I have my family is just great, but my husband and I, we just want to separate." Or there's a situation with immigration, and you say, "Listen, I need to talk to an attorney. Certainly, that will give me a free consultation." Because many people don't have the money, but we're thankful that we have Attorney David Shapiro that's willing to extend himself to give us quality information, resources, and services, and be able to allow us to be able to get this information and effectively transmit it to you. We want to thank all of you for staying right with us with this program because of the fact that there's many disruptions, but we felt that the information was so important that we would have not just cut the program out, but to go on. And certainly we want to thank Attorney David Shapiro for being able to go on. Some of my guests would say, "Oh, listen, I just cut it out, whatnot." But his passion and his determination to bring you, family members, quality information, resources, and services as it compelled him to continue this television interview. And so I really want you to take it with deep consideration. And the email is coming up on the screen. We want you to take that email and respond to it. Or put it down somewhere where if something does happen, you'll be able to get to it right away. In closing, we would like you to join with us as we raise funds through this last quarter of the year. We're looking at turkeys for Thanksgiving. We're looking at the Yankee Christmas food drive, all wonderful things that are happening with Church Alive. And we invite you to be part of it and to be able to take the gospel holistically to meet the needs of God's people. And so at this time, we end our program as always by telling you we love you with the love of the Lord. God bless you.